Hey, all I'm really saying is that it takes Hollywood a lot longer to make a sequel. This is Deep Dive with Dano, episode 2, almost 2 years in the making. That's right, it's taken 2 years. 2 years. If you're not even sure what the first episode was about, you may have to go back. If you're listening on Spotify or Amazon Music, you can see it very easily. It's right there, episode 1, called Win Now. This is Win Now Part 2, and you may need a refresher course, so you may want to go back and check that out, and I'll give you a quick synopsis. But first, before we jump into our discussion today, there is actually some good reasons why it's taken me 2 years to do this. 2023 was a long year for me and my family, and I think we'll do a later podcast about that. And so I'm just not quite ready to put that out there yet. So, but we're doing okay, and we're making it through. So that's where we're at. So let's talk about this win now kind of attitude. And if you remember, maybe you don't, the win now attitude, it's kind of this philosophy that I have, and it's not real hard to go find, but in society, especially if you look at sports, and it's this kind of attitude that, coaches got to win now. And if you can't turn it around in a year or 2 years, then you're fired and we're going to move on, because there's such this hunger to be on top, from schools, from athletics to academics to you name it. And so many times we're just hard to trust the process, I guess. Maybe give it some time. And I think that affects a lot of areas in our culture. And our last episode, we talked about specifically, it affects kind of our college age, our 20-somethings, our young professionals in the realm of work or careers, in that maybe you feel like you ain't got it figured out. Maybe you don't have all the answers. Fill in the blank. I don't have all the experience that's necessary to go after that specific career or job. And so the idea there was that, hey, at some point you got to understand that you're not going to have all of that starting out, and you're going to have to just jump in there and give it a shot. So here's the second area. The win now attitude, I think, has had a huge effect in the young professional, the 18 to 25 year olds, maybe 30 year olds. It's in the area of relationships specifically. We just think that, it's all got to be perfect. And the person that we pursue has to be perfect, or maybe there's someone that we kind of have a crush on, or we're kind of looking at, or kind of thinking about. And then there's like these quirks, those quirks that just kind of, and let's be honest, we all have them. I have quirks, you have quirks, we all have things that make us quirky. And then we find people that all have the same quirks, and we're all okay with other people's quirks because they're the same quirks that we have. And what I've discovered is that I think this win now attitude really leads into this unrealistic expectation when it comes to relationships, specifically dating, or maybe even friendships. We get to begin to be a little bit guarded when we're developing friendships, and so we've got everybody kind of at a surface level. It's difficult to find anybody with real deep connection. And that leads to a lot of lonely people. In fact, a recent study that just came out 2 weeks ago, I believe, is finding that there is a epidemic. They're calling it an epidemic of loneliness in our culture today. And I think some of it is this win now. Some of it is unrealistic expectations on other people, and some of it is unrealistic expectations on ourselves. What if they discover my quirks? What if they discover that I don't have it all together, like I'm pretending to have it all together, and I have to take the mask off that I've been wearing. And so now we have this epidemic going in our culture of loneliness. The biggest area that we do see this in, and I want to talk about this quite a bit today, is in the area of dating, or maybe moving towards marriage. I think this isn't the only reason. I think there's a lot of stuff that goes around this, and I know probably get emails and feedback from this from the critics, but I get that there's a bigger story a lot of times, and I can't lump everybody into stereotypes. But I'm going to tell you, if you just observe any couple that you know that's been dating for, I'm going to be generous here, 5, 6, 7 years. Like, it's been long enough where most of the people in their life is going, man, I wonder if they're ever going to get married. And then you get to a point where you realize, man, it just seems like it's stalled. Like the relationship has stalled. If you were able to get those two people to sit down and be transparent and honest with themselves, I think you find two people that have been sucked into a mentality, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, into the win now mentality. Because right now, I have an out, and it's an easy out if things don't go perfect. And not just that I'm expecting it to be perfect, but there's like these things, and they have to fix these things before I'm ready to make that big step, before I'm ready to make that commitment into marriage. But right now, we can just toy each other along. And I just think that if you take a good hard look at this mentality of the win now culture, it's this, like, we're going to get into this marriage and things are going to get hard, and we might not get it perfect, and we might not get it right, and there might be hard days, and there might be days that we feel like we lost and we're not doing it right, and then I'm going to want to bail. So I just want to say this. In marriage, there's going to be days that you don't get it right. And there's going to be days that you're going to feel like you have lost. There's going to be days where it's going to be hard. That's commitment. I'm just going to keep calling it quirks. I had things that drove my now wife crazy when we dated. And I've attempted and still continue to improve those things. Not out of obligation, but out of a desire that I want to honor her because I love her. And this isn't something, or these aren't things that she continually brings up or like they surface on themselves. Nobody has to bring them up, but she has those things as well. But as we dated and as we then progressed the relationship to being engaged, we knew and we were aware of those things. And those were things that we were like, you know what? This is still a person that we looked at each other and thought, this is still who we're going to pursue our future with together. I want my future to have that person in it. And if these are the things that I gotta have to work through or work with, then I'm going to do that. I want to do that, and we're going to do that together. And that's where that's where grace comes into your relationships. That's why grace is so vitally important and such a huge topic throughout Scripture, the Bible. Grace. Love one another as Christ has loved you. Grace. Now, I want to tread lightly here because what I'm talking about here, what I'm not talking about, I should say, I'm not talking about settling. I'm not talking about all the red flags that show up. Do not ignore red flags abusiveness, verbal, emotional. You can't ignore those things. Those are not things you say, oh, well, we'll just, that's not what we're talking about here. So I know there's some of you who are going to immediately go to that, but I'm not at that extreme on the spectrum here, right? I get that there is these are these red flags: abusiveness, emotional, relational, verbal, all those types of things. But on the other side of that spectrum, there's also passivity, laziness. Like if you've been with somebody and you continue to find yourself making excuses for them to other people, that's a red flag. And you might want to pay attention to that. If there's people in your life, and I'm talking like deep rooted people who love you and want what's best for you, and if they're telling you, hey, you may want to pay attention to some of these red flags, then you need to pay attention to them. Right? Like the norm, though, is when we have people that come to us and say that kind of stuff, we're like, well, I'm going to hang on to them tighter, rather than listening to the wisdom of someone that's watching it from the outside looking in. You need to pay attention. You need to listen. Now listen, there's some criteria to those people. Do they care for you? Do you genuinely believe they care for you? Do you trust them? Would you listen to them on career advice, right? Like, don't take advice from people, or don't take criticism from people you wouldn't take advice from. Like, that's a huge deal, right? But this win now culture is, we're seeing people now in this 18 to 25, 18 to 30 year range that, man, they're just, it's like everybody around them, even the two people in the relationship would have to admit, hey, this is kind of stalled, right? Like, yeah, he's promised to marry her, but everybody can he's not really serious about it, right? He just brings it up or talks about it or says what needs to be said to pacify her. And sometimes that's vice versa as well. But you can tell that there's no real intent to ever really make that commitment to someone. And I'm just telling you, whether you are the boyfriend in it or the girlfriend in it, or, whatever side of this you're in, and you're starting to look and realize like, oh my gosh, this is kind of not moving. I think you need to take a cold hard look and have a good long conversation about, are we really genuinely moving in that direction? But some of it is, right, like it's stalling out because there comes a point where this win now mentality has been so embedded in our hearts and in our minds that we aren't moving forward because of fear. Right? Like it's like, what if it's not perfect? It's not going to be perfect. Right? What if I find out that she pushes the toothpaste from the top of the bottle instead of the bottom? Like, oh my gosh, right? What if she wants to unroll the toilet paper from the underneath instead of over the top, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about. There's a right way to do it, right? What if he chews with his mouth open? And I just didn't know that until we got married, right? There's these little things in life, these hiccups, and right. And so now, because of this, what if we do it and it's not like, we don't have a perfect record after we make this decision? What if we go over and we feel like we lose on more days than we win? I would tell you, welcome to marriage. Marriage is hard, but I'll tell you, anything worth doing is going to be hard. I guess what I would offer is a piece of encouragement or something to at least consider when you find this is, like, if you found yourself in a position where you were promised a promotion, and it was a pretty big promotion, and yet the employer, after about 3 years, you finally caught on that they're just stringing you along. And what you found is that for 3 years, you've put things on hold. You feel like you have kind of slowed down. You stopped, right? And you kind of feel like, oh, I don't feel like this is moving anywhere. I think most of us would take a cold hard look at that and say, I don't know that I want to be working for an employer that's going to string me along. And I think there's a lot of relationships out there where you have someone just stringing somebody along, pacifying them. And you are in hopes, waiting and waiting, hoping that the day finally comes. And every time you talk about it, you feel like it's a passive conversation or it's an obligation conversation. Like, all right, we'll talk about it, right? There's eyes being rolled and kind of a bad attitude about it. We want to rush the conversation. I just think that maybe you ought to just have a good hard conversation about whether or not this is what the future has for the two of you, and if the two of you feel like each other are in the future, and is it a serious commitment that we're moving forward, right? Again, I want to walk slow with this because I get that there's external circumstances with a lot of you. Some of you have circumstances I have no clue what you could ever be facing. And there's definite clear reasons that the both of you have decided to take this much slower than maybe you'd hope to, right? But both of you are on the same page. And both of you are constantly in conversation and talking through that. But there's progress being made through those circumstances, right? It's okay to have circumstances. It's okay to be going through some stuff. Some people have to heal before they're ready to make that commitment. And that takes time. Those wounds, some of them wounds are deep, and it takes time. And so you give each other time, but you also give each other the support needed so that healing can take place. Rather than just, being stuck. No progress. Now, I also want to say this. I'm not the crazy family member that's like, hey, when are you going to get married? You should be doing this. Tick tock, right? Like the time's ticking. It's not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying at all. I just want to make sure that that win now mentality hasn't caused you to slip into fear. Fear of moving forward relationally, fear of moving forward, like we talked about on the last episode, in your career. Maybe there's something you're passionate about. This is, as we've talked about, this, doing this has been a dream of mine for a long time, and fear has probably been the top of the list thing that's kept me from doing this. It's not the only thing, but it sure is at the top. Because what if it sucks? What if it's bad? What if nobody listens? Then what are you going to do? So I would just like to encourage you as you look at dating, as you look at maybe you are single and hope to date. Maybe that's kind of, hey, I'm kind of ready to make that step. I want to get into the dating world. And I got to be honest with you, I am so thankful, so thankful that I don't have to be in the dating world anymore these days. It's just a whole new landscape that I don't know if mentally I would ever have been prepared for. But I just, I want to encourage you as a single person, right? Like, set your standards high. Set them high. There has to be a list of things. I tell this to my own kids. There has to be a list of things that are non-negotiable, right? And I'm going to be honest with you, as a dad, I think it's important that your top of the list non-negotiable is, where do they stand on their faith? Like, you want to be on the same page when it comes to faith specifically in Jesus Christ. Scripture is very clear about that. And so I think if you are in hopes of dating with the hopes of, hey, I want to see where this possibly goes, it's not rushing it. It's not like tomorrow. It's not, it's not all that. But if potential this is where I want to move in my life. One day I want to be married. Then you want to start out on the same page when it comes to faith. Maybe there's hobbies that you enjoy. You don't want to be with someone that despises and hates that stuff, right? There's got to be a list of non-negotiables. I tell my kids, I think you start with 12, right? It can be as long as you want or as short as you want. But here, these are deal breakers. These are non-negotiables. But then there's going to be some things that's like, I don't know. Yeah, it bugs me. Yeah, it annoys me. But man, I love them. And who cares, right? They chew with their mouth open. Drives me crazy. But man, they're awesome, right? They're always late. Drives me crazy. But man, I love them and they're awesome, right? Like those things may not be deal breakers for you, but what's happened in the win now culture is that we've expected the perfection of someone before we will willingly take the step of seriousness or engagement or marriage. So what I'm saying is maybe that you get into the dating world, you get engaged. Maybe you've allowed some of these non-negotiable things, this attitude of the win now, this attitude of unrealistic expectations on your fiance or the person you're dating. Like it's unrealistic to expect anybody to be perfect. And I'll be honest with you, it's unfair as well. Because we usually expect people to be perfect, but we would never expect ourselves to be. Or very rarely do we do. So I just want to encourage you that as you look, maybe you're possibly in the dating, maybe you are engaged, it's been a while and you're having this kind of dilemma internally. Maybe you got to sit down and make that list. Like, here's the non-negotiables. And if there's a bunch of red flags on that, if there's a bunch of things that you're just not willing to sway on or compromise on, and I think your non-negotiables, I think it takes very heavy red flags to move off of those, right? Like, I'm not going to compromise on my non-negotiables. But there's some things here. He was a truck person, but he's more into sports cars. Maybe that's not a big deal, right? I don't know. And so you got to consider that. You got to think about that. But here's what I want to leave you with is don't get to a place where this win now mentality that's affecting our culture so heavily, especially I think 18 to 25-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and it's affecting so many areas. And I just hope that you see it for what it is. We all want to win. We all want to do well. But boy, you can't set the standard so high that it's so unachievable. It's so unrealistic. And you can't put that on other people. You can't put that weight on other people, especially if they're people that we claim to love and care for. Again, as you know, these are simply my opinions. And this is kind of where we're at. But I would love to hear from you sometime. I've got an email. It's deepdivedano@gmail.com if you'd like to email me. I would love your input. I love your feedback. I'd love to see where we agree or disagree. Or maybe you've got questions that maybe give me some information of, man, I'd love to hear what you'd love to have me talk about. Maybe give you some input. Here are some things that are coming down the pipe for us in the future. We are potentially working on the details of possibly going live on a weekly basis so that you can submit questions through chat, which I'm pretty excited about if we can pull off those details. So you'll hear more about that in the next couple of weeks. As life settles down here, and like I said, I would love to share with you my past year, 2023. But it's going to take some time. It's going to take some healing, and as we process and work through that. But man, I'm so glad that you took time to listen, and I hope that you find this helpful. This is Deep Dive with Dano, and we'll talk with you soon.